And here they come.
I'm going to be a super long meeting, but I hope I don't miss it.
Welcome, colleagues. Wonderful to have you all back with us here at the UNGP Foresight for Systems Transformation session. We are going to get started here in just a minute. We have some colleagues joining us who are just making their way from the waiting room. So we'll give them another few seconds. Thank you for being with us. Great to see some familiar faces. We're also joined by some additional team members today. And so maybe while we wait, I'm going to quickly take a moment to introduce Darja. Darja is with us. Darja, if you want to give us a wave. She's going to be assisting us from a facilitation point of view, as well as Iman. Iman is part of the SOIF team as well, often works with us on our training programs as facilitator. And so between myself and Johan and Darja and Iman, you may see us popping into your group work today to support you. Also, welcome to Claudia and the UNGP team, of course, as well as Delphine and the ITC ILO team. So, colleagues, we are in our first session here for the week, really a theory session, Module 1C. We're going to be focusing on a specific part of our Foresight foundations here today, really an opportunity to learn from one of our leading practitioners, one of our experts. And this session here is really going to set the platform for the next few weeks of work that we will be doing together. And so let's locate ourselves for a moment where we are in the overall process. You will have seen the slide a few times by now, but essentially what you're looking at is the overall learning journey. As you can see there in the little red arrow, we're in part C of Module 1, how to do a successful scoping of a Foresight experiment. So if you're already thinking about how to use Foresight in your everyday practice, today is going to give you, again, a set of tools that you can apply quite practically to that. To remind you on the right-hand side, those little icons refer to the SOIF four-stage process, the 5 operating principles. We're now going to be digging a little bit deeper into that first step on the 4-stage process, which is called scoping. And we'll say more about that as the session progresses. And so let's just talk about what the session is about. Before we get into that, let me take a minute and share an image with you. We've shared some of the images with you from early in the 1900s, Foresight exercise out of France. What do you notice that's interesting about this image? It was obviously an image of the future, looking out 100 years at what society might be like 100 years hence. Any interesting observations? You can pop something in the chat or feel free to unmute your mic if you want to observe what you find interesting about that image. Who would like to venture an observation? Someone says, Gabriella says no cars. Gabriella, absolutely right. Some kind of sort of public transport bus, interesting bus. It looks a little bit like a Tesla Hyperloop vehicle, but on wheels, right? Someone else says driverless bus. Thank you, Martin. Women still in their house and men working. So you see there in the door frame at the back, the wife greeting her husband on the way to work. So maybe something about gender inequity being assumed to be perpetuated in society. You see the working man there with his briefcase. Teresa observing clean air, right? Surroundings. So this is a world in which some kind of environmental sustainability has been sustained, except for the fact, of course, that the city seems quite distinct from the residential area. If you look at the cityscape in the background, maybe that duality of living versus working is still a reality. Caroline saying design rather than true innovation. Caroline, you want to unmute briefly and tell us what you're thinking? Design rather than true innovation?
Hi. Yeah, I was just like looking at the bus, like, and I thought also driverless, but I didn't saw the little guy on top, which used to be the driver. So you still have a bus with wheels. We have like the bus driver that's there. So for me, it's just like it looks futuristic, but when you look past that, it's still like the same. It feels so like the then current thinking seems to be solidified. It's just kind of like with a futuristic shapes. That's the feel that I got from that.
Very interesting, Caroline. So there's this tension between images of the future, a future that's truly different, versus images of the past that have been projected into the future, sort of that we spoke about last week, the used future or the colonized future, that somehow we seem to imagine a world where the future is the past with bells and whistles. And so let's move on from there and begin to get into our session. You would remember we touched on the futures triangle and the pace layers. We would encourage you to go and revisit those. Some of you have already started using those in your own experiments or your group work. We are, as I said, getting into the first step of the 4-stage process today, really getting deeply into scoping. And so we're going to begin to understand how to scope a foresight experiment. And we are at the start of what we've described previously as the divergent phase of the process getting increasingly more complex and informative. And we're quite a long way off from the convergent phase, where we start to close out the project and really get to the nuts and bolts of what are its implications. And so I see that my slides are taking a minute to update online. Might be that the network's a little bit slow. So in a moment here, you're going to see a slide referring to the divergent and the convergent phase, which we have spoken about previously. And then there we are, I think it's come up. And so you can see there, we're right at the start of the divergent phase, where we're increasingly thinking about more and more information, more data, more complexity. And the scoping phase is really the start of that. And then importantly, number of learning points that are central to our session today. At SOIF, we designed Foresight for purpose, complexity, and participation. So we're committed to Foresight that is not just about information generated in some back room, but really purposeful Foresight that takes care of the complexity involved, and doing so with participants, diverse voices in the room, but also that Foresight differs from forecasting and more linear processes. We spoke about that in module 1A and B, and that conversations about the future can be deeply political and personal. And so there's an element to which Foresight is inherently subversive. It's done in order to bring about change. And so that's quite important, that effective Foresight practice can be used to lever impact in strategic planning and organizational change or systems change. And then, of course, change takes time. That this is not something that is done quickly or easily. It's really challenging, and that change of that magnitude that you refer to does take time. Just to recap here, what we covered in this foundational module, we're really focusing on how to think like a futurist, how to understand and scope a Foresight project. That number one there is quite central to what we're going to cover today. How to design a project for the context in which we are delivering that project. How to be aware that Foresight can be used to create impact and change, and how to do that. And then lastly, really understanding the stakeholder terrain in which that Foresight is going to be delivered. And these are so crucial to the success of a Foresight experiment or a Foresight project. Now, I want to introduce to you in a moment our faculty for today, the Executive Director and founder of the School of International Futures, Kat Tully. But before I do, let me just touch very briefly on two quotes that sort of lay the foundation for what scoping is all about. The first one is by the Foresight guru, Jim Data out of Hawaii, who says, organizations focus on issues created in the past, and you are helping them to move beyond this to understand a new reality. So there's this tension between the past and the future. And then Eshanti saying, avoid the trap of interesting but not useful. So it's so easy to do interesting Foresight, but that doesn't go anywhere. And then people say, well, what's the point? And so to get us into that journey of how to do this well, let me introduce Kat Tully. Kat and I go back quite a number of years, have worked on multiple projects all around the world together. I'm always inspired by Kat's energy and her curiosity, but I guess more than anything else, her desire to use Foresight to make a difference in the real world. And so Kat, thank you for being with us. We look forward to the session. Over to you.
Many thanks indeed. And perhaps I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. Shall I try that? Let me see whether that works. Is that okay for everybody?
We can.
You can see me. Okay, that's great. Okay, well, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. It's my absolute pleasure to be here to talk about something that I think is really, really critical, and it's where the magic of Foresight really comes out, which is scoping the work. And I think what really summarizes the magic of the power of this scoping stage is a quote and a conversation I had with Lord Whakawhenua from Tonga, who shared that when he was doing the Foresight project for his country, it was the point at which they realized that they were doing a Foresight project not for a small island developing state, but for a large ocean state. That reframing in the scoping phase made the work totally transformation. And that, I think, is what the power of a really good scoping process really helps you do. It's where the magic happens, but it's often underplayed. So what we're going to be doing together in the next hour or so is to really, I hope that you'll get out of this an understanding of the importance of scoping and getting a sense of what good scoping activity looks like and what bad scoping looks like too. And also to get a sense of clarity, just demystifying what this looks like, consider some of the elements that make up good scoping and a few tools that you can use. So I'm going to be doing a bit of an introduction, talking about 5 principles and key points that you really want to cover in the scoping phase. We'll have a bit of a kind of simulated case study, a video where we'll kind of work a little bit together, but then right at the end, you'll apply this. We'll have an introduction to a tool that you can use to apply it to the topics that you're working on. So why is this so important? And why do I feel so passionate about the power of scoping phase? Because it's not easy to be the bridge between the present and the future, which is often what the work is that we do in Foresight. And so there's valuable insights about the future that you get from Foresight exercises, but does it add value? Does it create change today? And so the reason why Foresight in the strategic planning process or in the innovation process actually can add value is because it actually connects into the present and it needs to translate into action. This, for example, is something that I did 15 years ago in the UK government, looking at pandemics. If you read this 3-page document, which is open source now, and I can share it with you, it's almost a blow-by-blow description of the 2-year pandemic exercise that experience that we've been through. Now, that was really good at translating into behavior and preparedness for a while, but then it stopped being effective. So how do you ensure that the kind of quality Foresight work that you do really creates change is the question. And so we're often really, if you like, in the middle of Horizon 3 and Horizon 1 as Foresight actors. We're bridging the gap, the present, the past, and the future, just as that futures triangle was talking about. In any work that you do, there are influences, historical, present, and future, and you're trying to navigate the people who are interested to create change. And it's in the scoping note and the scoping process that you do that most effectively. And so the scoping stage kicks off this 4-stage process, which is a scaffolding through which you can start off with a challenge and an issue today on the 25th of April 2022. You can go into the future and then come back and having explored those futures, come back and change the world around you. It's a decision-making framework, if you like, this 4-stage process, a scaffolding that can help you design in the here and the now, a human-centered Foresight with impact project that has a start, the middle, and an end, but that really enables you to tap into all those forces that we've been talking about. And so this 4-stage process has come from a lot of research and a lot of good practice, looking at what really creates change. When you look at different governments and businesses and teams that do foresight really effectively, what do they seem to do together? And let's distill those insights. And effectively, you want to pretty much spend a quarter of your resources, including time, at each of those stages. And what tends to happen is that people tend to spend loads of time on ordering, looking at the future, a little bit of time on 5% of their time on implications, and very little either on scoping or integrating, but yet that is where the real magic happens. So just to recap, we are doing these exercises to create impact, often in unexpected ways that you don't know at the beginning of the project, and they take time and resources and political capital. And the full project design, you think through the 4 steps at this first stage. It's a bit like that in Einstein quote, you know, if I had an hour, I'd spend 55 minutes to really understand what the question and impact is. So that's what you're really trying to do. And I'm sure that you have, many of you have got project initiation documents of your own that you can integrate and enhance with what we're about to explore together. And really, it's important, but quite difficult to do. It is an art and a science. And so let's see how to go about doing that. Because what you're effectively doing is identifying in this first stage who goes on this journey with you and how you plan for it to create transformational change. And you are often in the work that you do as members of the UN system, creating networks for transformational impact. We are often working on issues around human rights, about women's rights, about issues to do with food security. And often we're thinking about how do we weave coalitions for change so you can bring some of the early adopters together with the incumbents and some of the really long thinking experts and inspirers, and weave them together to create systems transformation. And building that common purpose across that network in the first stage is really important. And what we will be doing at some point, I think in the next few weeks, is introducing you to how network weaving, the domain and practice of network weaving, fits in very nicely with Foresight indeed. So we are starting on this journey together. We are learning how to scope in order to make sure that you set an appropriate question and design for the project that you're trying to do. All of you have got these 7 different projects. You've got your own personal ones. So I would encourage you, as you're listening to what I say, thinking about how might this apply to my collective project, and yet how might I also apply this in my work? So why do we do it? Basically, every single project that I've ever been asked to do could have basically taken 10 years and taken 15 PhD students to work on it. If you're looking at the future of terrorism, if you're looking at the future of Oman, if you're looking at what's happening to mental health of people in Maputo, all of those pieces of work could be as long as or as short as they can. So let's try and design it to maximize the impact, and also to take into account the fact that obviously in very different contexts, different sectors, you have different amounts of time, different approaches, but you want to kind of have a kind of similar approach across the board. So each new situation that you go into requires thinking about the design, about which tools, and about how you can engage the right people. And so this is a systematic process, if you like, to kind of get under the skin of what is the purpose, what's the type of project, and who should be involved in order to get impact. And there's lots of different tools that you can use. We're going to apply a few of them later on today. And picking up on the quotes that Maris just shared, I think there's just really interesting tensions. There's never a right answer on scoping, but what you're trying to balance, because these quotes capture beautifully what we're trying to do in the scoping phase, is we're trying to set the parameters of what we're trying to engage in. So we make sure we don't boil the ocean. And that's Donella Meadows from her brilliant book, fantastic quote. Where do you draw that line? But then both Jim and Ashanti actually had this in an exchange in one of our events. And I think what they really contribute is the fact that, as well as setting parameters for your work in the scoping phase, you need to, as Jim says, it's about reframing. You can't take what people often come with, because that may actually reflect past or present or official or old futures. So this is the opportunity to change things. And of course, Ashanti reminds us of the importance of impact. These aren't esoteric or nice to have or kind of exploratory conversations. This is about, at the end of the day, having impact. So how do you always balance the tensions between them? So I'm going to go through 5 learning points throughout our session today. And the first and most important learning point is around getting under the skin of the purpose. When you are doing some work, some foresight work, people very often come to you with quite different reasons for doing that. And, you know, when you're, this is back to the whole impact point, if you like. I like to say that when you're looking at the futures, it's about changing the world around you in some way, because otherwise you'd postpone your exercise to a year later, when you're closer to the futures and have more data about it. So there's something about, you know, understanding why are people in the here and the now putting the time and energy into exploring those futures. And if you understand that motivation, that will hugely help both match the organizational need and take it further to what it really needs. So getting under that motivation is the key learning point I want to communicate. And there is often one dominant reason for doing so. Let's explore each of them in turn. Strategy development is quite a common one. The RCs are doing a 5-year plan or supporting the Ministry of Planning. So ECLAC, CEPAL, a regional body or a country office may be working with the Ministry of Planning to look at their typical kind of strategic planning out. So that would be a regular kind of every 3 years, every 5 years process. Let's also look out as part of that. So that's a very typical approach. And the reason why I'm going into this is because the language and the people involved and the questions that they have are often quite different. You often have the Oman 2040 work that we did, very typical kind of plans. They all fall under strategy development. I know that we've got someone from the Ministry of Planning in Colombia in the room as well. Some really interesting work being taken by different ministries to kind of incorporate foresight as part of their strategy development. There's also risk management. That could be, for example, if you're looking at the future of conflict. Increasingly, some international organizations and think tanks are looking at the future of conflict spaces. So the Great Lakes or Central Asia as conflict systems, and want to see how they change over time to manage some of the risks. Or, for example, with pandemics, the WHO was very interested in kind of going, okay, let's get ahead and think through what some of the mental health implications, domestic violence implications, or issues around refugee camps and health may be as a result of the pandemic. So very much looking from the risk management perspective. Sometimes organizations come together and want to explore the future of their sector. So an example of that is a work we did with a leading energy distribution company in Nigeria, who was really exploring what does the future of a green energy market environment look like out to 2035, and doing it with their competitors and their collaborators, doing it with people in the logistics chain with them, with their communities and users and clients, but also bringing on the international organizations like the World Bank and investors, as well as the government. Another example of that is, some work we did working with some higher education institutions in Malaysia, exploring, if we look at the future of higher education to 2035, what does that look like? Because effectively you will have a cohort of Generation Alpha students. What are their expectations in terms of education, how they want to learn? You will have a growth in internationalization of the international higher education market. And you will have very different needs in the country for skills. So how do you do that, etc. On leadership, it may be that there's a single leader that has come into the organization. Paul Pullman's a good example, and wants to kind of really change it around. Or perhaps one organization like Bertelsmann in Mozambique worked with the other international organizations in Mozambique after Cyclone Idai, going, let's not rebuild what was there before, let's bring together young Mozambicans and think about what does their positive 2030 look like, and let's rebuild towards that instead. So just giving you a sense of there are different ways that people get into this, and they are not exclusive, and very often you start off from a risk management perspective, but then you go to a sector or leadership perspective and participatory approach. So we will be posting this, I think, and sharing this with you, but this is a really helpful way of understanding some of the questions that people have when they come to you, and an indication of, aha, okay, this is about innovation. This is probably because there's a new disruptive technology that's just come in. For example, I'm working on food security, and I've just seen that there's some really new, interesting GM synthetic biology developments. Let me see about how that might affect us and the people that we work with and our goals. It may be organizational purpose. This has disrupted the field that I'm operating in. The humanitarian space is different. How do we, as the new humanitarian that's actually providing communications and evidence to the space, what does it mean for us in providing journalism and news and communications in the future? So very different questions, but ask those questions on the right-hand side and then challenge and build on them. So, as I said, it's not easy, but whether you're talking about a scoping process that identifies whether you're looking at, for example, the future of a small island developing state or a large ocean one, or as one of our colleagues on this call has done, working on, are you looking at actually the future of cars or the future of mobility? The language and what you're doing is really important. So let's bring this a little bit to life. It is an art and a science to do the scoping process. Let's do a live simulated exercise to see what this might be like. So this is an anonymized example of something that we did, and it's about basically strengthening democracy in a conflict affected region. And so what we're going to do is we're going to watch a video. I was asked to do this piece of work, and I basically got it wrong in my first scoping interview with the client. So I managed to get into my time machine, which is a very useful part of the Foresighters toolkit. And I went back and I did that video again. I did that interview again, and you're going to watch both of these together now. So pay attention, and over to you, Marius, to play the video.
Kat has received an email from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Blavia's private office, asking her to do some work on the future of Afritania.
She has got a 10-minute meeting in the diary to get more information about the proposed project from the Minister. Good morning, Minister, and thanks for making the time to chat through this new commission that you've given our team to look at the future of Afritania.
Good morning, Kat. Always good to see you.
Very good. So, Minister, is there anything specific that you'd like us to look at? What are the political, economic, social and legal issues that you think are going to shape the future of Afritania?
Politics, of course. We've got an election coming up, and it's unclear how that's going to play out. Wider regional geopolitics as well, and economic prospects. It's always very important for the party in power to ensure economic growth. I'm particularly keen to see how the resources issue is going to impact on economic growth and political stability.
So to take these into account, we probably need to look out, 10 years, do you think?
Yes, I would like to see how these questions affect economic growth and social redistribution, the potential there, but also the risks.
Okay, and when do you want the report by? What would you like it to cover and perhaps look like?
So I'd like to get a sense of the risks. I'd be interested in looking at the possibility for commercial support and development finance, and in terms of format, standard submission would be fine.
Okay, all great. What we'll do is we'll bring in the Department for International Development and Trade and Industry, but are there other partners that you'd like us to engage with? Perhaps even some of our private sector companies that are based in Afritania?
That could be interesting. I'd particularly like you to engage with Dortmund, though, and possibly the UN.
Okay. Is there anything else? When would you like to see our initial findings?
No, I think that's it. 2 months, if that's okay for the report.
Fabulous. Okay. Many thanks, Minister.
You're welcome, and very good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you. Good morning, Minister, and thanks for making the time to chat through this new commission that you've given our team to look at the future of Afritania.
Good morning, Kat. Always good to see you.
So, Minister, why Afritania? Why is it important to look at this issue now? What's actually changed?
That's interesting. You should ask. I've actually just been having a conversation with the Foreign Secretary of Dortmund, and we're looking into the idea that we could both contribute to a shift in policy in the region.
Okay, so tell me more then, Minister. What's changing there that you fear or hope might happen, and what's a desirable outcome for you for Afritania?
Well, there's a possibility that the political elites of Afritania and Coastal Republic might set aside their differences in order to exploit the commercial benefits from a peace dividend.
Okay, tell me a little bit more.
There are drivers of the situation at the moment, in addition to the environmental one, are the fact that the cost of this disagreement is escalating for them. And on the other side of the equation, the dividend from an agreement on the resources issue would be significant.
Okay, so this seems like a good thing. So what's the downside that you're worried about in that scenario?
Well, we're worried there may be an elite stitch-up and the benefits not redistributed. So we need to think how we can work with Afritania and Dortmund with Coastal Republic to ensure that negotiations take place within a UN framework.
Okay, and in your view, what are the main opportunities for interventions in the upcoming years?
Well, we're going to review the sanctions regime in a year. In a 4-year time frame, the UN mission is going to be reviewed. And then we're also interested, at the moment, the Coastal Republic is in the top 5 of our development assistance list, and we are going to need to be reviewing that as well in the 5-year time frame.
So it looks as if it would be useful to do scenarios 10 years out, but look at early indicators and risks. How are you intending to use the insights that we give you in this project? Do you have anything specific in mind?
We're planning a visit in the next couple of months, in 2 months' time actually, to the region with the Dortmund team. So that could be quite helpful. Of course, we'd need to have policies cleared in advance.
Okay, so would it actually be helpful to do part of this work jointly with our counterparts in Dortmund? We could develop some quick and dirty scenarios and then work out policy responses and implications for how to kind of head off the possibility of a non-UN based solution.
Well, that sounds very interesting.
Okay. We'll be wanting to bring other departments as well, other departments across government. Would you be okay to chair an initial steering board meeting so we have representatives from each of the relevant departments signed up to our project?
I don't see why not.
Excellent. I'm also hearing that the regional and UN angle is important, so we'll bring in the representatives for consultation. We also did some separate analysis before this meeting after getting your request, and it seems like the gender perspective might be quite interesting because Afritania have really moved and progressed forward on that regard over the past 5 years. So with your agreement, we'd like to put a bit of an emphasis on that as well.
That sounds interesting.
Many thanks. So, final question perhaps for you, Minister. What would you like your legacy around this policy area to be?
Okay, right. Let's work together. I hope you enjoyed that little terrible scene role play. It's a little embarrassing to watch again, but I hope it kind of brings to life some things for you, and it is intended as just a bit of fun to kind of spark off a conversation. So what we're going to ask you to do together now is spend 1 minute writing down your reflections individually, will be in plenary, on given what you've just watched and your experience, of course, what makes for good or bad scoping. 1 minute, and then we'll put you into random pairs and just discuss your thoughts for 5 minutes. And we'll spend a few minutes when you come back to take your feedback in the chat and also any contributions that you want to make verbally. So pick up your pen and paper, and I'll put my timer on for 1 minute for us to write down. Please write down your thoughts individually, and then Ruth will press the button and you will go into paired discussion. Given what you've just watched and your experience, what makes for good or bad scoping? Okay, Ruth, please press the button, and in your pairs, please have a discussion to share what you came up with.